tracing Gothic themes in Joyce Carol Oates' Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been? Where are you going, where have you been? I'll refer to it as Wake from here on, is highly regarded as one of the most terrifying short stories ever written. As impressive as the story is, it relies on several Gothic tropes to convey its essence of fear. It is appropriate, then, that the story's central focus is on how old ideas perpetuate themselves in shocking new forms. This is the effect of creating a meta-language in which the story comments on its own status as a story that perpetuates the Gothic in modern times. Wake sets itself apart from classic Gothic narratives by displaying a failed American dream instead of the overt and gaudy castle, and by displaying an aging villain who tries to be suave and sexy instead of the classic ghouls. These differences act much like the makeup worn by the villain in Wake, Arnold Friend, masking an old tale of terror behind the facade of the new. It is important to consider the continued relevancy of the Gothic genre and what its narratives have to say about constructed sexualities, about family relationships, and about society at large. It can be difficult to align a work from the mid-20th century with works from the 18th century, when the first Gothic novels were written. However, one critic effectively bridges this gap by stating, the central concerns of the classic Gothic are not that different from those of the contemporary Gothic. The dynamics of family, the limits of rationality and passion, the definition of statehood and citizenship, the cultural effects of technology. This quote adds to a construction of the Gothic genre while also giving specific Gothic concerns to find and isolate within Wake. This paper focuses primarily on the family dynamics and the limits of rationality, as these two are most apparent in Wake. Wake begins by establishing the relationship between several members of a nuclear family unit. Connie, the principal character, is smothered by her overbearing mother, annoyed with her perfect sister, and neglected by her emotionally absent father. The story is told from a close third-person point of view, which simultaneously allows the reader to sympathize with Connie while also keeping a psychological distance. This constructs Connie as a subject who we are meant to study, and Oates gives us plenty to work with. Connie is very conceited and makes sure to note the difference between herself and her mother, who she describes as a shadowy vision of herself, as she was right at that moment. She knew she was pretty, and that was everything. Her mother had been pretty once too. Beauty is everything to Connie, and she uses her beauty to justify her negative feelings towards her sister and mother. The lack of attention from Connie's opposite-sex parent is another reason why Connie resents her mother so much. Connie can enter the imaginary with her mother, who was once pretty like her, but she is denied access to an imaginary relationship with her father. This is likely caused by a lack of interest on the father's part, but Connie sees her overbearing mother as the true physical obstacle between her and her father. The existence of June further complicates matters, as she is praised by the mother and is thus more likely to be allowed access to the father. Gothic stories have always been ripe for such psychological analyses, but especially during the 20th century. What becomes most marked in the contemporary Gothic, and what distinguishes it from its ancestors, is the protagonist and the viewer's return to certain fixations, obsessions, and blockages. In Wake, Connie is obsessed with two things, youth and beauty. These obsessions appear often in the form of the teen music that Connie listens to, music that promotes an idealized kind of love between young and beautiful teens. Connie's musical fixation on youth and beauty reappears in her encounter with Arnold Friend and his creepy sidekick who roll up to Connie's doorway when she is home alone. Connie's initial reaction is a sort of startled interest, as the story at this point reads like a problematic teen romance. However, interest slowly gives way to terror as Connie notices an outdated slogan on Friend's car and then notices how old Friend looks. Indeed, Friend is described in uncanny and grotesque terms. His whole face was a mask, she thought wildly, tanned down to his throat, but then running out as if he had plastered makeup on his face but had forgotten about his throat. Something is off about Arnold Friend, and as Connie tries to discern what that is, so does the audience, as Oates is careful to give up as little information about Friend as possible. What is known is that Arnold is not who he says, and is certainly not the same age as Connie. More than that, he, Arnold, also has all the traditional sinister traits of that arch-deceiver and source of grotesque terror, the devil. Arnold is the devil in disguise. which accounts for his supernatural ability to learn the name of Connie and her friends, and his ability to see all the way across town to where Connie's parents are enjoying a barbecue. All Gothic works need a monster, and Oates supplies the arch-monster here. What is more interesting than Arnold's identity, however, is his fake identity. Arnold Friend is dressed up to look like a dreamy young teenage male to try and seduce Connie. Connie, who is obsessed with pop music, has an ideal man in mind, as we are told earlier in the story. All the boys fell back and dissolved into a single face that was not even a face, but an idea, a feeling, mixed up with the urgent, insistent pounding of the music. The music in the story acts as a kind of trance-inducing noise, a trance that leads Connie to value what Arnold Friend has disguised himself as. The trance-like music also plays in the seedy diner, where Connie spends her time, which further links Arnold Friend to religion, as the seedy diner is also a grotesque parody of a church. The building is bottle-shaped and has a grinning boy holding a hamburger aloft on top of it. This mock church is an example of how Connie worships capitalism with her constant consumerism of popular culture, giving a clear transgression on Connie's part. Connie's transgression is that she worships beauty and builds shrines to the superficial instead of real primordial forces that are represented by the satanic Arnold Friend. Arnold Friend's disguise, just like the diner, is a commodified and grotesque version of something else. Connie, then, is the transgressive woman who has punished archetype, which is common to the Gothic narratives. Her transgression is also her religious adherence to popular music and its flashy images of heart-stopping beauty and steamy teen romance, which leads Connie to replace the Christ figure with a sensual masculine image. The moral elements present in the story is clear. Connie is punished for perverting religious belief. The moral element of the story makes sense when one considers how the 1960s were a time of sexual liberation and shifting values. Waig, like most Gothic narratives, shows the terrifying possibility that the past will repeat itself. The supposedly more liberated women of the 60s and the beginnings of the second wave of feminism were threatened by an antiquated yet ever-powerful force of patriarchal control, namely rape. Connie, a sexually liberated young woman who is hot and knows it, is at risk of being exploited by a toxic masculinity that won't take no for an answer. Indeed, Arnold Friend is a misogynist by constantly implying that he is going to give Connie what she wants, whether she likes it or not. A good example of this is when he says, "I'll hold you so tight you won't think you have to try and get away or pretend anything because you'll know you can't." Thus, Arnold Friend disguises himself as a teen heartthrob of contemporary music, which also reflects that more sinister aspect of the teen heartthrob who won't take no for an answer. When Arnold asks, "Don't you know who I am?" he is attempting to trivialize Connie's choice to go with him or stay, by implying that he is indeed what she wants. Connie could not disagree more with Arnold's assertions and searches futilely for the power to deny him, but Arnold persists even after Connie is certain that he's a fraud. The project of sexual liberation and female freedom is at a constant risk of the old patriarchy. Connie is faced with this grim reality from the comfort of a contemporary home. This blend of contemporary culture and old malevolent forces aligns this story directly with the Gothic. What is fascinating is that the story, while presenting its audience with all the above, is also commenting on itself and how it perpetuates the Gothic genre. The connections between diner and church, and Arnold Friend and Satan, act to achieve multiple ends. Arnold Friend is disguised as young, much like how Waig is disguised as a contemporary style of story. This disguise is completed by the fact that it is loosely based on true events. Charles Schmid and Arnold Friend have eerie similarities. They were both older men that drove goldish cars and used makeup and shoe stuffing to make themselves more attractive to younger girls. This is a reference to the serial killer Charles Schmid, who killed several women, was caught and covered by the media before Oates wrote her short story. The reality of this event, coupled with Oates' decision to use supernatural elements, suggests that while the story is a Gothic story in disguise, so too is the simulacra of the American 60s as a time of relative freedoms and progress. This real-life Gothic story, the brutal murder of young women, shows how even though a society can make leaps and bounds, they are ultimately limited by the tendency of the human psyche towards primordial and timeless evils, which have traditionally been represented by Satan. More than that, it is also limited by a violent masculinity that is made possible by constant reaffirmation of "don't take no for an answer" sentiments and popular music. The story is simultaneously self-conscious of its existence as a continuation of a geriatric genre, and socially conscious of the time in which it was written. The overall message can thus be interpreted as a condemnation of the superficiality of progress and the grim consequences of a patriarchal society that does not respect women's choices.